crime to be able to convince a man or a woman to go into your room with you in 6 minutes. That's not a crime by the law. That's a personal decision to make. But it is a crime to record a person without their consent. And apart from, and even when you record and keep it on your phone, and the person finds out and reports to us, we'll prosecute you and you go to jail. That's the law of the land. Now, you don't just record it, but you go and post it on a website for financial gain. That gentleman will be looked for. We will activate every resource in our disposal, working with Interpol. The way we've worked with Interpol to extradite Ghanaians to other jurisdictions, we will request the Russian authorities, and that's why I've invited the Russian ambassador, to work with our law enforcement. We want the gentleman to come to Ghana, to be brought back to Ghana, extradited to Ghana, for him to face the rigors of our law.
But you see, there are far-reaching consequences to the steps we're taking. If the Russian constitution is clear, Russia will not extradite any of its citizens for prosecution. But you see, there are far-reaching consequences to the steps we're taking. If the gentleman is not extradited because of the provisions of the Russian constitution, what we have done and what we will conclusively do by working through Interpol to get the international arrest warrant is that we will confine him to the prisons of Russia. Because as soon as he steps outside of Russia into any other country, he'll be picked up.
All right. Welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream. We cover all things Africa related. As you can see, the Russian predator has been exposed. His identity has been confirmed. And the man who has been known to be secretly filming African women has been identified. Sorry, that's him there. As you heard there are some difficulties with potentially getting him back into the country. And so we will do our best to tell the story for all of you. And there are many other stories from around the continent, but many of you are interested in this. So we wanted to make sure you guys are up to speed. So before we get into today's stories, we start with introductions. I'll turn it over to my co-host before I introduce myself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gloria Ayo. I am the creator of Diaspora Station, and I joined Joe weekly to talk about issues affecting our continent, and very happy to be back. Hi, Joe.
Hey, welcome back. Of course, welcome back every week. We're here. So happy to have you here. And of course, I'm Joe Hatagwa. I am the founder and CEO of Authentic African Media. Our goal is to help people do one of three things: visit, move, and invest in the continent of Africa. Of course, if you're planning to do one of those three things, it's important to know about what's happening on the continent in somewhere you are looking to either visit, move, or invest in. And so we want to make sure that you guys are aware of the news of the day. And so that is why we do this live stream weekly. I also do my best to try to connect people on the continent with those in the diaspora, and those in the diaspora looking for products and services. I do guide people to those things. So back to the headline story. For whatever reason, it took a while, but we finally got the identity of the Russian man who leaked videos of Ghanaian women, and his name is here, Lyukov. And he was aged 36 years old. Here's another look at the gentleman, which is why he was always wearing those sunglasses. But this is the man who was recording women as they were unaware. So before we get into the video describing exactly what happened, for those of you who are not aware of the story, let me just give you some background. So there basically was a cross-border sexual exploitation investigation, and it's ongoing in Africa, involving a Russian national accused of secretly filming sexual encounters with women in Ghana and in Kenya, and sharing that footage online without consent. The suspect himself is a self-described pickup artist, quote unquote. He's 36 years old. He allegedly used a camera equipped with sunglasses for the recordings. use camera-equipped sunglasses for the recording. So Ghanaian authorities have taken the more bolder steps than Kenyan authorities as of today, stressing that despite his likely departure from the country, it seems like he is already back in Russia. The Ghanaian authorities are preparing international legal steps and may seek assistance from Russia, as you heard in that video before. So we'll play a little bit of this video so you guys get a little bit more of an idea of what the allegations are and what actually happened, because I don't know if all of you are aware of the details of this story. And so we want to make sure that we give you that background before we give you our thoughts and feelings on the matter. So let me pull up this video here.
A cross-border sexual exploitation investigation is now unfolding across Africa. Authorities in Ghana and Kenya are pursuing a Russian national accused of secretly filming sexual encounters with women and allegedly sharing the footage online without consent. African and Russian media have identified the suspect as a self-described pickup artist believed to be in his 30s. The suspect is believed to have used camera-equipped sunglasses, though authorities have not officially confirmed the details. Now, reports say that he traveled to Ghana, where he allegedly recorded sexual encounters with women. Some of that footage was later reported to have circulated on social media. Ghanaian officials say that the suspect has likely already left the country, but they stress that departure does not mean that he is beyond reach. Authorities say they are preparing international legal steps and may request assistance from Russia in this matter.
That gentleman will be looked for. We will activate every resource at our disposal, working with Interpol.
So there is the story. Lots of layers to this story and this topic. And let me just say, before I turn it over to you, Gloria, there's been a lot of chatter about this, right? Around the continent and around the world. I've had many folks reaching out to me about this story, people living in Ghana and people living around West Africa and people that I know who spend a lot of time in Kenya. But Gloria, your thoughts on this story and all the details that are now unfolding.
Yes, Joe, there has been a whole lot of chatter around this. And I put out a video a couple of days ago. And I mean, I've been following the story, but I posted something that Larry Madowo said and inserted, a couple of excerpts, I guess, photos and videos showing, what the intensity with which this man was operating on the continent. And the reactions, I think for me, that was like a survey of people's overall reactions. It was more what felt like, or what looked like victim blaming than us actually focusing on what the issue is. And I get people's concerns. I'm not here to, knock down anybody's moral stance or anything like that. We all have our moral reservations or our reservations when it comes to morality and things like that. But I also think beyond whatever decisions those women chose to make, whatever they chose to do with their bodies, if at all they did anything with their bodies, because not every single person on camera actually had anything to do with him. But whatever they chose to do, that is a completely different conversation. When it comes to things that are legislative, I don't like to moralize them. I don't like to conflate both. So unfortunately, a lot of reactions we have seen have had to do with people victim blaming, and it's really unfortunate. But I do want to highly commend Ghana's Minister for Communications, Samuel George. This man has been on we've seen his videos, we've seen him speaking so passionately, basically speaking up for these women. And that's why we have to move from an angle of victim blaming to actually focusing on what the bigger issue is. On this platform, we talked about a couple of months ago, well, maybe about half a year ago, thereabout, we talked about the sands, in Namibia, and how they had been exploited by some foreigner who was going around, I think a British guy, and exploiting this community and children and taking their photos without consent, and obviously without them even being aware of what was going on. We have seen in Malawi where this was years ago, a Chinese national who came to Malawi and was having African children from villages saying things in his language that were basically racist, having children who had, they were just happy. And they said things in his language that were racist, deeply racist things. And then they would transmit that to some website in China, and people were getting laughs out of it. And the Malawian government stood firmly. We're not aware of anything that the Kenyan government has done, but I like to bring up countries like Namibia, Malawi, and Ghana that have stood firmly on the side of these victims. And this is why I say it goes deeper than whatever people have chosen to do with their bodies. We have to also understand that many of these victims are young women from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. I'm not here to justify what has happened, but this man is basically an example of foreigners who use their perceived wealth and foreign status and their race to bypass consent and manipulate women into situations they might otherwise avoid. And this has actually brought conversations about how extreme poverty, and this is why I think this should actually even be the focus, these conversations about how extreme poverty makes women vulnerable to international digital predators. This is what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on racial fetishization and supremacy. We should also look at the racial power dynamics that are involved. There is a disturbing trend where some foreign nationals view African women as disposable or props for illicit content. We might think these women deserve what they got, but believe it or not, this can be somebody closer to you than you would know. There are men, even men, who have been in situations where they've been exploited. And I do understand why the reaction has been split. And some are calling for at least the Ghanaian government, they're calling for the suspect's extradition and trial. This darker side of the internet, again, engaging in victim blaming, criticizing their women for their proximity to the foreigner. There is some truth to it, because the truth is there are some, people, I've seen it personally, and when we white worship. But again, the focus must remain on the predatory criminal and the lack of robust cyber laws that protect women in the global south. We should focus on how our governments can protect people from digital exploitation on any level.
All great points. Yeah. And just for some context to what you're speaking to in terms of the backlash. So for those who may not be aware of the full story, so there are a number of different things that have been alleged, right? So what we do know for sure is that on his social media, he was recording his initial encounters with young ladies, right? And as under the guise of a pickup artist who barely spoke English, to be honest. But what he would say is generally, "You're beautiful, I'd like to meet you," and then invite them to his place same day. Many of the women that we saw on his social media apparently complied and did such. There are other alleged things that have happened. Like they're also alleging that he recorded those encounters on another site. So he used that kind of as a lead, like to get leads to bring him over to a site where he was getting paid to for him basically displaying the videos of him and these women in these compromising positions. So that is why he is actually being this is why there's kind of an arrest warrant kind of issued on his behalf for unknowingly recording in because that's there are cybercrime laws now in America. They call it revenge porn laws, and I think they've made some adjustments to the terminology, but it's along those same lines. And internationally, they've started to begin to put laws like this into place. So that is the law in which he is alleged to have broken. Now, on the other topic that you mentioned, which has caused a lot of controversy on the continent, is everything you just mentioned is based around two things, right? So in Kenya, apparently, and this is not across all Kenyan women, but there's this terminology called Mzungu, which is what they call people of European descent there in Kenya. And for some women, it's seen as a status symbol to be with one. That's one. And so what you found is in these videos, what you found was in some cases desperation, in some cases what seemed like very easily he was able to get them to come to wherever he was and to be able to do what he actually did on camera without their consent or knowledge. And so that's where the conversation that Gloria was referring to is coming from, is that there's been this other discussion about how easy it was. And there are different kinds of discussions about the men on Africa and how they're not doing enough to keep these women. There's another discussion, which I think is more important, is the economic instability and challenges for these people, because a lot of these things happen in desperation. What we're seeing on the continent of Africa with what he did is not new to the continent. It is not new to emerging markets or the global south, whatever you want to describe as areas where the GDP is much lower than where these people are coming from. So if you change those circumstances, these kinds of things are less likely to happen. That's one. Two, I think the other piece of this is I think what you mentioned, white worship, I think is what you described it as. And I think, there's this discussion that we've had here before, and I've mentioned this online previously, in many places around the continent, there is a reverence for people of European descent, right? They're the former colonizers. Many times they run NGOs, nonprofits that bring water, food, power supplies, electronics, etc., own major businesses. And then also too, in the place of worship, many people who are on the continent are Christians. And even those who aren't Christians and practice Islam also agree that, Jesus was a prophet, right? Just in general, in terms of belief systems. Now, let's look at who he looks like in these households, right? So if you're in a Christian household, you're going to have a European-looking Jesus in a photo, generally above a master bedroom somewhere, or near in a place of prominence in the house. Because this is a very religious household, and many of the households are, and that is what they believe. So if your Lord and Savior is of European descent, people who are bringing food and supplies of European descent, people who told you they civilized you are of European descent, you are going to hold them in higher regard. And it also, coupled with economic circumstances, will lead to people acting this way. It really is unfortunate, because I think the conversations aren't like this. Yeah. The conversations are mostly conversations around all the things that are talking about what actually happened instead of the symptoms and how to solve the symptoms, right? We need to really talk about pathways to ensure that these kinds of things don't continue to happen, because this isn't the first time and it won't be the last time that something like this happens. So I'm glad to see the Kenyan government working with Interpol to see if they can make sure that no matter where he leaves Russia to go to, he is arrested.
Kenya, right? or Ghana? Ghana was doing that. And I hope that Kenya also works to do the same. Because I think it's really, really important to make sure that we have systems in place to have consequences for these kinds of actions, because there never have been really before, right? People continue to do this stuff. That's why he so boldly did it. He figured, as long as I leave, as long as I don't put the videos out until after I leave, which it's apparently what happened, nothing will happen to him. And as of right now, it doesn't seem like much will. So, yeah, I think it's really important to just speak to those things and keep it there, because I think those are the important pieces to the story. Now, we spent a good amount of time on this story because I thought it was important. It was one that everyone is talking about, and it is an Africa-specific conversation and story. So we wanted to make sure we started with that and led with that. Many things happened this past week on the continent. So we do want to start stepping into some of the other stories that are out there. And then there are also stories that are happening with people from the continent or recently from the continent. So there's a recent story here in the United States that has become more prominent in discussions in mainstream media. And surprisingly or unsurprisingly, CBS News
has done a feature story on the South African refugees who are resettling in the U.S., who have said that they are facing challenges with the system. Surprise, surprise. The Free Press, which is, all this is the new CBS that we're dealing with here. If you guys don't know, look it up. But there was an investigative reporter who joined CBS to discuss it. And basically what this is, just for background, for those of you who are unaware, you guys might remember there was a discussion that there was a quote unquote genocide happening in South Africa. Trump said he saw that white South Africans were being unalived in mass. He did a press conference with Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa. He was there at the White House. You might remember Trump put up pictures. He was displaying pictures. Ramaphosa did not speak up for his country, did not dispute what he was seeing, because some of these pictures were pictures of the Congo. They were pictures of other parts of the continent, these mass graves that were shown. And when we talk about what's happening in South Africa, it's not specific to white farmers. There's violence happening all over. And so, however, there were the first tranche of South Africans, Afrikaners in particular, that were given refugee status while all other refugee programs were put on pause or made more difficult to get. The South African refugees were fast-tracked and also told that they would likely get a pathway to citizenship. What this story is going to talk about is the fact that those South African refugees started to see what refugees in America have been dealing with since these refugee programs have been in place. And so what they're complaining about is things that refugees have been dealing with from Sudan, from Somalia, Sierra Leone refugees, all kinds of refugees who have come to the United States. And so we're going to hear how CBS is reporting this story, and we'll have some commentary on the other side. So let me find the story here. For some reason, I can't find it. Oh, here we go. There we go.
Welcome back. You may recall last year we reported on the Trump administration's decision to limit the number of refugees entering the United States. That number was set at 7,500, a significant cut from the Biden era. In addition, the administration is prioritizing white South Africans for admission, a group it says faces persecution at home, something the South African government disputes. Well, now an investigation from the Free Press shows many of those white South Africans, also known as Afrikaners, are barely scraping by because of what they say are failures in U.S. government systems. Madeline Rowley is an investigative reporter for the Free Press, and she joins us now from Virginia to talk about this. And we should note the Free Press and CBS News share a parent company in Paramount Skydance. Madeline, good morning. Talk to us about the conditions some of these refugees say they are experiencing, because the administration made it seem as if they were being prioritized. They are a special group.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on. Yes, I spoke to 10 South African refugees who told me that, they came to the U.S. hoping for a better life, a better situation, just as other refugees. And the government contracts with 7 refugee resettlement agencies that are paid hundreds of millions of dollars per year to provide safe, sanitary, and affordable housing. And unfortunately, what I heard from these Afrikaner refugees is that they're spending weeks in motels in unsafe areas. They're being offered housing that is full of mold, apartments that are full of mold in expensive areas. So each refugee is allotted $2,000, and all of that has been going to rent. So they're really left with nothing. And these agencies are supposed to help them apply to jobs, obtain temporary benefits such as SNAP and Medicaid, and basically other people from the community, like neighbors, are having to step in because they just, in some cases, can't even get a hold of their resettlement agencies.
And Madeline, what jumps out to me about what you're saying is we have this almost split screen between what you're describing their life is like now and how they looked in May of 2025 when they were being welcomed here. They were holding American flags. They had smiles on their faces. When you asked refugee groups about these issues with the resettlement process, what are they telling you? How common is this?
I'll leave it here, but because this is a long video. But your thoughts, Gloria, on one, the mainstream media, CBS and the Free Press, deciding to do a story on these refugees, but never sharing how this has been for other refugees. Your thoughts, and also the story itself.
I was going to say, I'm heading to the grocery store. Would you like anything? You know how people write that in the comments when they're like, yeah, anyway, does anybody, what's everybody having for lunch? Let's talk about other things. But anyway, it's just so ironic. And, you know, we cannot reiterate enough how Black pain or Black inconvenience constantly gets minimized in the eyes of these people, the empire, you know. This is a group of people who basically helped to make the US asylum system a geopolitical tool. They helped the US reward a specific demographic while arguably leaving those in more traditional life-threatening peril around the world, not just South Africa, with fewer avenues for safety. And of course, all this with the help of Elon Musk, who used this public platform and AI tools to mainstream this false claim. So they have now provided the cultural permission for the US administration to treat the same issue of humanitarian crisis while ironically withdrawing aid to the South African government. What farm attacks are the reality in South Africa, but there has been no evidence to prove that this is state-sponsored or that a certain group is being targeted. And even Afrikaners who were, even those critical of the ANC or the government in power, did express their reluctance to leave. There's a reason they did not leave. And the reason is because they know, they are well aware of the privilege that they enjoy. It's this same privilege that would make a platform focus on how inconvenient it's been for them. And perhaps they're doing this also, maybe to be fair for balance, they're probably doing it to highlight the irony, because this is beyond ironic. You really thought you were going to America to continue enjoying the same privilege? Do you not understand the privilege you have enjoyed by being descendants of people who came and took a land illegitimately? You've enjoyed this privilege for centuries, and now you want to go to a level playing field to face the real world? Well, cry me a river, and welcome to the same systemic issues that people from other races have been fighting for many years, for centuries. So I don't want to hear about it. Again, I would like to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they're highlighting it just to show us the irony of what ended up happening to them. But I can bet you these same people who are now the victims here in America were living a life where they were riding high off of their privilege. And that's all I will say about that.
Yeah, I think you said it all. I think the only thing I'll add is, you know, look, I think the good thing is that it's highlighting the conditions that refugees go through, right? And it you can juxtapose that with the rhetoric for how they are described, right? Because if you hear how people describe in this current administration, how they describe other types of refugees, you know, I think that this is really important to you know, show what refugees actually go through, right? And so, you know, look, I'm of two minds with this, right? Because it's like, you know, there are refugees in this country that are in public office who are called all kinds of names all the time by this administration, some in Minnesota and elsewhere. I'll just leave it at that. And then there are others who go under the radar, never have heard from, never known what their situation has been. And I think this does highlight that. I don't know if it means that any change will happen, but maybe it will. You know, what we find is when people who look like them go through something, they tend to want to make changes about it, right? When it's not an otherized other group, they tend to want to make some changes. So what these Afrikaners have been dealing with, hopefully, shines a light on what refugees have been dealing with for, you know, decades, and does lead to change in the conditions that refugees are feeling and go through. All right, so moving on to back to the continent and to Burkina Faso, So there have been some acknowledgement by Burkina Faso's military government that there's been a series of terrorist attacks in the north and east, resulting in at least 20 fatalities over a 4-day span. And these were all Al-Qaeda linked groups, asserting that they had unalived numerous Burkina-based soldiers, although this remains unverified. So the violence, which targeted military positions, included a number of deadly attacks. So with that, we also have news that Burkina Faso and Russia have formalized a strategic partnership, making a shift in the Sahel's power dynamics. So Moscow, in Moscow, the country signed an agreement to replace the previous cooperation framework, emphasizing a new phase with a focus on security and military cooperation against terrorism. Additionally, they aim to enhance economic ties through a new intergovernmental commission led by Russia's energy minister, signaling intent to deepen economic presence. So this partnership also includes collaboration in media, they say, to counter Western disinformation, and the agreement reflects a broader geopolitical realignment influencing the region's future. So we're going to play a video on the strategic alignment, and we will have some commentary on the other side.
And staying with the Sahel, the power landscape is shifting under Ibrahim Traoré and Vladimir Putin. As Western influence recedes across parts of the region, Russia is expanding its footprint. And now Burkina Faso and Moscow have formalized their partnership. In Moscow, the two countries signed what they call an agreement on the foundations of relations. The framework replaces the previous cooperation structure between the two states. Both sides describe it as the beginning of a new strategic phase.
Every word has been carefully chosen, every paragraph thoughtfully crafted to produce this consensual document, which opens the prospect for both countries to enter a new phase with concrete projects.
Security remains at the center of the partnership. Russia and Burkina Faso plan to coordinate on military and technical support to address persistent terrorist threats. Moscow says that counter-terrorism cooperation in the Sahel will remain a top priority.
Cooperation in the military and military technical spheres, the fight against terrorism, and other threats that unfortunately persist in this part of the African continent also remains our top priority.
All right. So with that, the stories that we just mentioned and that particular meeting, thoughts on the strengthening of this partnership and the change, the strengthening of this partnership with Russia.
Yes. And, we've expressed time and time again that the U.S., with everything that was happening, especially as soon as Trump got into power, with a lot of policies that the U.S. was making that were not in favor of Africa, we said time and time again that it would not favor the U.S. Now the U.S. is in the Sahel, the U.S. is in Nigeria, the U.S. is now sending people to Africa, even changed its AFRICOM commander, just trying to soften relations with Africans because they're well aware of the power and the partnerships going on with countries like China, Russia, and Turkey. But I do want to point out that earlier this month, I think February 10, just days before this pact was signed, Traoré's government did take the radical step of dissolving all political parties in Burkina Faso. And his argument was that this was necessary for national unity and to prevent political divisions from being exploited by imperialist propaganda. So both nations constantly framed their partnership as a joint effort to counter Western information warfare and any sort of propaganda that's been put out there as it relates to terrorism. It's not to dismiss of the fact that these things are in fact happening, but at the end of the day, information is power. It's whatever you put out there that can control, the perceptions that people have, especially of Africa. And we know that those perceptions are extremely sensitive. They do go a long way in determining how people treat us, having people from countries coming to exploit people on the continent and put things on websites without people's consent. I'm just saying it's all part of it. It all goes a long way. So this partnership, at the end of the day, it's mutual. I've always said it. I may not necessarily like every single thing that China does or Russia does. I'm going to be honest, that one I cannot really change my stance on. But I will emphasize that, and I've said this time and time again, they have proven to be far better partners than countries like America and France have been.
There you go. I mean, yes, and yes to all of what you said. I will just add, look, as you guys can see, right? It's like a multipolar world, and you kind of have people go to one or the other, right? And so, that's what's been happening over the last however many years, let's say, 70, 80 years since the Europeans have officially given Africans their independence. Because it was too expensive to continue to stay there or do it in the way that they had been. Are these countries still independent? No. And many times they have been, reliant on Western aid and now sometimes Eastern aid and or partnerships. And so, like I said, previously, I'd like to see more work on the continent with each other. However, I think it is important to state that these terrorist groups have outside funding and outside weaponry, right? From many times stolen oil money throughout, I guess what people would say is now East Asia, right? So we're talking about some of these, what people would formerly call the Middle East, right? And so and speaking specifically about terrorist groups that are there, funding terrorist groups on the continent, not necessarily, well, sometimes governments as well. But what that's doing is it's causing African leaders to have to go elsewhere to find the weaponry to be able to fight against what is happening there, right? And so, that's the reason why you see these pacts, especially in the AES with Russia. So to that point, tensions are brewing in another part of the AES, in particular in Niger, with France. And, the relations between Niger and its former colonial ruler, France, have nosedived since 2023. And that changed over to Tchiani's rule in the country. He obviously pivoted away from Western's security alliance, accusing Paris and France of destabilization and sponsoring mercenaries. That's one of the things that we've heard a lot from the AES, is that they accuse France of sponsoring these mercenary and terrorist groups a lot of times who commit attacks on the government's military. So tensions hit a new peak this week as Niger's presidential chief of staff called citizens to prepare for what he said is a war with France, a move that Paris dismissed as information warfare. And obviously, of course, the fallout extends beyond just rhetoric into potential high-stakes battle over resources and nationalism. And we will have to see. I mean, it may have been a war on prepare for war for our resources, but also, it could be prepare for war in general. And so hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but we'll play a video to speak to exactly what was said, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
And for our next story, let's turn to the Sahel. Anti-French sentiment is gaining momentum in the former French colony. We are talking about Niger. Now, tensions between the two nations have been running high since the junta took over in 2023. Now, the junta is led by General Abdourahmane Tiani, and he was officially declared the president in March of last year. And it has constantly accused Paris of trying to destabilize the country. And now, one of the members of the junta took things a notch further. Tiani's chief of staff, Amadou Ibro, has asked the people of Niger to prepare for a war with France.
Know this, we are going to enter into war with France. We were not at war. It's now that we're going to war with France.
Now, he made these comments at a rally earlier this week. The crowd was full of young people, and they cheered and chanted anti-French slogans. And what has been France's reaction to this? Now, Paris has denied the allegations and has rejected the possibility of French intervention in Niger.
Thoughts, Gloria, on what's happening with Niger and France at the moment?
That's some heavy claim or some heavy declaration. You know, the fact that they're declaring that France is preparing to fight a war in Niger because Paris allegedly blames the Nigerian transition for what's been going on in France. For those who aren't aware, France has not been the same since they got kicked out of some countries on the continent, which has proven the fact we have made for many years that France and other countries that claim that they're first world or whatever their claims are profiting off of the continent. And it's not been a fair partnership. Back to the conversation around partnership, it's left the people hugely disadvantaged, of course, with no help from our own leaders, because at the end of the day, they're the ones at the gate who let these people come in to exploit the people. And this is why we do not keep our criticisms just for foreign governments that have done our continent dirty. We also criticize our own governments who do not have the best interests of the people at heart. And when we talk about military rule, Joe and I have talked time and time again about how, you know, it's the world has gone, or at least the continent has gone from being so afraid of the military to embracing the military. There are countries on the continent that, and I don't know if it's a fortunate or unfortunate thing, I guess it depends on your perspective, but there are countries on the continent where citizens will literally go to the streets and jump for joy if the military took over the so-called civilian government that has failed the people. So now you see why Nigerians are in support of their government, and that's why their government can come out and say, hey, France is planning XYZ, be prepared. At the end of the day, it's about their resources. We know the junta has moved to nationalizing the local operations of the French nuclear giant Orano, and Nigerian officials have frequently pointed to the disparity where Niger's uranium powers 70% of France's electricity, but 80% of Nigerians live without power. So that relationship needs to end. You can't come to our continent, take our resources, profit off of it, and you know, if you might have enjoyed a beautiful partnership, but you've chosen to keep exploiting the people. And as I said, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, history has proven whether or not these claims of you sponsoring things that are destabilizing the continent, whether or not they're true, history has actually proven these governments right, because you've never really had the interest of the people at heart. And we have trends of certain countries being behind leaders and coups that ended up destabilizing governments that meant well for their continent. So yes, welcome to 2026, I guess.
Yeah. We'll follow this closely. I mean, this is, you know, look, obviously we hope that it doesn't lead to boots on the ground and any actual warfare. You know, they're already dealing with enough with these mercenary groups in country that they're attempting to fight. So, you know, having a situation with Paris, France, it's not ideal, right? Now, I think the good news is that, you know, France has dismissed it, all of it, and hasn't escalated with any further rhetoric and talks about potentially coming there. But we will see what action comes from just those dismissals. So we'll be watching closely. We'll keep you guys posted. We hope that this doesn't lead to anything more. Now,
I wish they would,
wow.
but I won't go there. Well, I already did. I wish they would try it.
I don't know. There's a lot on their hands already. I don't know if the France were doing that would be helpful. And of course, you know, the United States also, in general, backs its partnerships with other folks. So does the rest of the EU. They're supposed to. So they already have an incentive to be there, right? So if France makes a move, the US has an excuse to be there. So I would hope that they actually don't, because they're already incentivized to be there and to overthrow, you know, Chiani now. So I'm hope that they're just left alone and they can do what they need to do. But that's my viewpoint. And that's what I'm hoping for.
And I'm sorry, Joe, not trying to argue with you, but I do believe in the power of the people. Forget what our civilian governments have done to hurt the people. I do strongly believe that Africans are well aware, as is proven by this comment. Let's just pray and hope our family in Niger prevail and be victorious in defending our Black African people in Niger. I think it's a new dawn for Africa, and the people are ready. And that's why I said I wish they would. They are not that powerful. Thank you, Joe.
Okay. I hope so. Hey, listen, I have been made aware of the weaponry that is available, that is not available in the AES. And I know that they're working with Russians to increase their weaponry. But, you know, drone dropping bombs, etc. There's a lot that they have that the AES does not have access to. So that's all I'm talking about. And so that's what I'm concerned with, because, you know, we know that U.S. in many instances, if gets involved, does not care about civilian casualties. And so there'll be many loss of life. And the ability to strike back can only happen within country. They wouldn't be able to strike back anywhere else, which of course I don't want it to happen here anyway. But what I'm saying is, just looking at the military might, I don't know. I think our people are powerful, right, and strong, but there are also limits to the weaponry, right?
And we also have China and Russia and Turkey. But that's a fair concern.
Let's see if they would step in. Right? I'm not sure that they would.
You're right.
Right? So right. I don't, you know, that's the concern that I have, is that there, you know, obviously there's some partnerships and there's political alliances that they say that they have, but previously they haven't stepped in, right? Like there were alliances when there were other overthrows, right? And they hadn't stepped in. There was rhetoric, but there wasn't any other kinds of responses. So, but we'll watch this closely and we will see what happens. So fingers crossed. In the interest of time, I think we can get through one more story while I'm on the live stream at the very least. And that is speaking to something that we've talked about maybe once or twice a while back. And that is Africans fighting in the Russia-Ukraine war on both sides. It's something that has been reported on by mainstream media and also many independent media outlets, but something we thought we could bring up here. So there's a recruitment crisis that's unfolding on the African continent as South Africa and Kenya are looking to rescue nationals lured into the Russia-Ukraine conflict under false pretenses. And it's not just those two countries, but these are the two countries that are working on something. So basically, these people are promised lucrative opportunities and administrative roles. And so several young Africans instead found themselves deployed to the front lines of Ukraine's, Donbas and working in drone factories. The South African presidency recently confirmed direct talks between Cyril Ramaphosa and President Vladimir Putin to facilitate the return of its nationals trapped in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Kenya has condemned the use of its citizens as quote unquote cannon fodder, reporting that over 200 Kenyans were deceived by fake recruitment agencies. So we will watch this video and have some commentary on the other side.
Hello and welcome. Our top story today is from South Africa. The country is working to get back its nationals trapped in the Ukraine war. Now, these are the people who were lured into fighting for Moscow by fake job offers. Their bait was an opportunity to live a better life, but they ended up digging trenches and dodging bullets on the front lines. And now, to repatriate them, President Cyril Ramaphosa dialed Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two discussed the return of South Africans scammed into joining the war that was never theirs to fight. Here is a part of the statement that the South African presidency had put out. after the call.
President Ramaphosa and President Putin pledged their support to the process of returning South Africans fighting alongside Russian forces in Ukraine. In this regard, teams from both sides will continue their engagements towards the finalization of this process.
You can turn your newsletter into an actual business. You just need to stop using 5
Sorry,
platforms
guys.
to do what one was
Too
really
bad.
built for.
My apologies.
Now, back in November, the South African government said that they had received distress calls from 17 men trapped in Ukraine's Donbass. They were reportedly tricked into joining mercenary forces. One of the biggest allegations was made against the daughter of South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma. Now, she is among the several people accused of recruiting men to join Russian mercenaries.
They were fooled to fight in a war that's in a European, barbaric, terrible war that Africa has nothing to do with. And it's a colonial war, so seeing Africans fighting a colonial war against a free country is especially insane. And by the way,
it is especially insane. So your thoughts, Gloria, on this topic?
Yeah, you know, the irony of this whole thing is that it's looking as if these countries, well, maybe Russia specifically, is viewing the global south. And this is why I say I don't necessarily like every single thing that Russia or China does, even though they are the better partners and they've proven this throughout history. But it kind of goes back to the rhetoric of going to the continent for cheap human resources. And you know that people are not necessarily going through the best financially, and it just seems like you're exploiting that, my opinion. But you know, intelligence reports from both Nigeria and Kenya are revealing that, as was pointed out in those videos, that these citizens are being lured with promises of lucrative non-combat roles such as security guards, construction workers, or electricians, and then they get there and they find themselves having to fight a war they didn't even sign up for. I do want to point out that in Nigeria, the constitution states that if you fight in a foreign war, you could get sentenced for up to 10 years. So this is like a double tragedy for these families or these people who go out, you know, to this country out of desperation, and then God forbid they lose their lives. But if they do manage to make it back home, they could face a sentence. And I guess the big conversation or the big takeaway should be that our leaders need to do all they can. And this goes for Kenya, this goes for South Africa, this goes for Nigeria. All countries really on the continent need to do what they can to ensure that the people do not get to a point of desperation where they're signing documents that they cannot even read because it's in a foreign language, and they end up risking their entire lives because they're desperate. Because, you know, there's a saying, all unaliving are unaliving. I'm just using that paraphrasing here. All unaliving are unaliving. So people are prepared. They're like, we feel like we're unaliving where we are anyway. So let's go where we can and see maybe we will make it and, you know, be okay economically.
Yeah, and I'll say too, you know, what I found is, you know, I've gone to career fairs and conferences where universities and jobs are being offered, and many times they are offered by those in the Far East, right? So you'll find that there are, you know, scholarships offered for Russia and Ukraine. And prior to 2014, with the annexing of Crimea and the further you know, escalations that have happened over the last couple of years, both of those countries were countries where people would go to get educations because it's far cheaper and more, and also accepted generally by other parts of the world, right? So many times if you get, you know, you become a doctor on the continent of Africa, it's not always accepted when you travel somewhere else to be able to practice medicine. But if you travel to, let's say, the Ukraine or Russia, many times it's a little easier for it to transfer over to other parts of Europe, let's say, for instance. And so you find people traveling who aren't very high-skilled workers or in careers that are high-skilled like that, going for like what you're seeing here. And people in school, too, by the way, there are being offered jobs. So this is speaking to people who are leaving to go there, but people who are already there are being offered jobs. And there's been stories this entire time, throughout this entire conflict, where both sides, people have been recruited and unalived as part of this war. You know, really, really important to talk about this because I think it's not talked about enough on the continent, and sorry, my computer froze, not talked about enough on the continent, or even in the mainstream media here outside of the continent and in the diaspora. So we wanted to make sure we called out that story so people were aware, because I don't know how many of you were aware of this, but it's something that has been happening in a reason that has nothing to do with those who are going to fight for these. Okay, so anyway, with that, I think we are at time. I don't know, Gloria, if you're able to keep going with the news around the continent.
Yes.
Okay, if you are, great. So I will leave you guys in very capable hands with Gloria. She's going to go through the news around the continent so that you guys are aware of some of the stories that are also out there that we didn't have time to go over today. I have to jump, but I want to say thank you for all of you who joined. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Of course, share this with as many people as you can, and make sure you subscribe to both platforms, Authentic African and at the Gloria AO. So thanks, Gloria, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you.
Guys. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you
guys.
so much, Joe. All right, see you soon. Okay, I'm just going to start with this. I think that there's some stories we didn't get to cover that we really wanted to go, into. And this has to do with Xi Jinping. So if you're not aware, China is actually proposing a 0% tariff deal with Africa. And as we know, Trump is having aggressive he's made aggressive tariff moves, really unrealistic, unfavorable tariffs on the African continent. And that hasn't helped, obviously it's not helped the continent economically. And now Xi is actually striking with zero tariff. And, it goes back to the point I've always made about better partners, whether or not you like China or Russia. You can't argue with the fact that if you were to compare, they've proven, at least on the surface, to be far better partners than certain countries have proven. Another story, Ramaphosa, Meloni of Italy, and Guterres have warned against Africa resource exploitation. I don't know if you saw the video, the comment that Marco Rubio made recently about, some people interpreted that as, him co-signing neocolonialism and endorsing things that have not helped the Black race in general, not even just the African continent or immigrants throughout the world. So in light of all this, you've had people speaking against the resource exploitation that is going on the continent, and I just find it very ironic that comments like this would be made. Meanwhile, there is something, comments like what Marco Rubio made would be made when things are still going on in Africa. Don't let anyone fool you. We're still being colonized as a continent. Congo is a great example. Sudan is another example. So these things are ongoing. Now, there's something going on in Guinea-Bissau that has to do with a vaccine trial controversy. The WHO has actually, shared its own concerns around, basically it's a US-funded hepatitis B vaccine trial that's going on in Guinea-Bissau, where they're trying to use children as, I guess, guinea pig for these trials. And the WHO is concerned, well, they're coming from an angle of, well, because they're going to have to delay certain vaccines that are necessary for, infants that are coming into the world. So they think it's actually really risky for these children. And I think beyond all of that, people are outraged and speaking up against this. We're just bringing this to your attention in case you're not aware of it, of how highly unethical it is. We're tired of Africans being used as guinea pigs. How much more children, infants that come into the world, and then you want to test something on them. So yeah, that is going on in Guinea-Bissau. Please feel free to research more on that. Nigeria jailed Chinese nationals for cybercrime. So yeah, 2 Chinese nationals got in trouble because they were accused of a recurring issue of cybercrime. And yeah, that's, I guess kudos to the Nigerian government for doing that. And more importantly, we hope that any, cybercrime beyond these nationals that's happening in the country can also be tackled. Mali has renewed Barrick's mining license. There was a whole thing going on with Barrick, but just FYI, that license has been renewed. But possibly under new terms. So again, while I would prefer that we're self-sufficient as a continent, if people must come from the outside, the partnership has to be fair. It has to reflect in the lives of the people, because if it's only empowering your people or if it's only favoring your people, then we don't want it. Okay, it has to be on our terms. We own the resources. We don't need you, really, if we really think about it. There's been a video that's been going viral of Kenyans fighting for Israel. This one is extremely controversial. We know Nigerians have also, there have also been videos that have been trending fighting for Israel. And of course, people have criticized them for supporting, a country that's done certain things to Palestine, done awful things really to Palestinians. But I think for me, it's again the conversation of, okay, you have the energy. Are you also going to fight for Sudan? Are you also going to fight for Congo? Because just to reiterate, we do not have enough people fighting on their behalf. And speaking of fighting, there's something going on in Nigeria that I would like to draw your attention to. Back to Nigeria. There's a protest. There's been a protest. To just simplify it, some Nigerians are protesting the government's move to revert to manual election result transmission. And even opposition figures have joined the demonstrations. And the reason that went viral and why people kept protesting was because the 2023 election was extremely controversial, where people feel that the government rigged its way into power. Some people feel that way. And it's like now you're saying that the election coming up in 2027 should, revert to manual transmission. And just FYI, Nigeria spent billions of naira to get those electronic transmissions in place, and suddenly you're concerned about network. But after all the outcry, the government said, okay, you know what? We're going to allow electronic transmission, but when there are network issues, so they put a clause in there, when there are network issues, then we're going to revert to paper. Okay, so people are concerned because it's like, okay, you're already planning to use the manual, and then you're going to claim that the network failed, and you're going to find a way to rig the elections. There are transcripts of manual transmission that happened in 2023, where you will see where there were scribbles, and those were presented as the election results. So Nigerians are fighting this on social media, fighting this. They were at the National Assembly. They even got tear gassed. They're fighting this because they're concerned that basically the government is getting ready, according to them, to rig the election in 2027. There was a workers' strike in Kenya, moving on to Kenya, that caused some kind of disruption at the airport. But from what I think the last update I got on that, they've had a conversation where they've, I guess, agreed to certain things, and it seems that has cooled off for now. But that's it. That's basically news throughout Africa. Please feel free to research everything that I've shared with you if you want more information on it. But we thank you all so much. God bless you all. Well, or whatever you believe in, for tuning in. And we hope to see you soon. I am at the Gloria Ayo on all social media platforms. And Joe, of course, is authentic_African everywhere else except X. On X, he's simply Authentic African. All right. I hope I didn't mix up the social handles, but if you search for him, you'll find him. He's extremely popular. Thank you all for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you all so much. Please like, share, subscribe. I saw somebody post that earlier. Somebody commented that. I thank you so much for that. It's really important. This is how we get our stories out there. Keep liking, keep sharing, and keep subscribing. Thank you all so much, and have a great rest of the week. Bye.